Now, Jonathan Wilson with us. Hey, Jonathan.
Hi, how you doing?
I was just checking. It's been a while. You were last with us December 15th. AFCON was starting. Wilfred Nancy's early impressions of Celtic, not good. Ruben Amorim had just beaten Wolves 4-1. And Arsenal were 2 points clear at the top of the table. I guess if Man City win their game in hand, Arsenal will still be 2 points top of the table. Some things change, some things don't.
Yeah, they do. I mean, um, that is a lot of change. Nancy gone, Cup of Nations being incredibly banal until 2 minutes into injury time. But yeah, I mean, the truth is that Arsenal haven't really changed in 4 years, have they? They have the same strengths, the same flaws, and that's part of the problem.
Their game last night at Molineux, it was such a perfect start. Obviously, Declan Rice, a very kind of great flat angle delivery. Saka with the header. They're 1-0 up. It's a great time to score. And then Hincapi on 56 minutes makes it 2-0. Also a great time to score. Kind of any half-time rousing is firmly put back in its box. And, it's Hincapi who's the left back. For all the talk that Arsenal don't play good football, and there's merit in that, there is interesting interplay at times. It is a left back making a great run in behind and a great ball and a great goal. And you think, okay, they're not playing stunning football this evening, but they've been very professional. And Great Wolves strike brings them back into it. And then in the 94th minute, Gabriel, David Raya, confusion, ball drops, and of course it goes off the post and off a defender into the net. So, what would you say of the performance? What would you say of what Arsenal did last night beyond those obvious points?
I mean, it was really poor. They they'd struggled against Wolves in the game at the Emirates. If you remember, they conceded the late equaliser and then they got the own goal to win it, which at the time it was one of those games where you sort of think you can read this two ways. It's either a team really struggling to put away what certainly back then was looking at one of the worst teams in Premier League history. I mean, Wolves have improved since. So that there were concerns with red flags, but they did get the winner, and that is what champions do. They find a way. But then to fall into the same trap in the away game, and Wolves have improved, but they still only won one game all season. If you're the team top of the table, you're 2-0 up with half an hour to go against a team that's lost 19 of 26 Premier League games. The idea you wouldn't put it away, but it's never happened before. In the Premier League, the team top of the table has never lost a two-goal lead against a team in the relegation zone. So that's how unprecedented this was. And last night was one of those nights where I didn't quite know what to focus on. So I had the Arsenal game on one screen. I was flicking between Champions League games on the other screen. I'll be honest, when I went to 2-0, I turned my attention to Glimt against Inter and then thought, actually, I'll just go check the ice hockey. Missed the two Glimt goals. And then suddenly Bueno scores and the Arsenal game's got all my attention.
Yeah. And how did they react after going back to 2-1?
Well, to be honest, even at 1-0, they were playing poorly. That's towards the end of the first half, the first 10 minutes of the second half. Yeah, I was watching, I think they could be in bother here. But then the second goal goes in, and you think, no, it's fine. It'll be an unremarkable. I mean, to be honest, the Sunderland game, yeah, clearly they were the better side in that game. Clearly, you can't say anything other than that was in the end quite a comfortable win. But they weren't particularly impressive. And the first two goals both came from Sunderland giving the ball away cheaply. Admittedly, partly because Arsenal put pressure on them. That's what Arsenal do. They squeeze you, and eventually you make a mistake. And they were ruthless in punishing that. But it wasn't a game I came away from thinking, yeah, they are nailed on champions. It was a game I came away from thinking, yeah, I suppose you probably need half a dozen of those games in the season where, without really playing particularly well, you're just a bit better than the opposition. And Wolves caused Arsenal way more problems than Sunderland had. But still, 2-0, you think it's done and dusted. But it was the anxiety, the inability to string two passes together, the lack of attacking threat. The 5 minutes before the equaliser, Arteta's standing on the touchline, just with his arms out, palms down, going, calm down, calm down. And I mean, on the one hand, he's obviously identified the problem, but everybody in the world's identified the problem. But he's not able to instill that calmness in his side. And then the thing that I think was really telling was that after the equaliser goes in, I understand Calafiori's sort of head in hands. But whereas they probably had 3 or 4 minutes where they could have done what they've done in the home game, they could have gone down the other end and got a winner. And Arteta can't get them going to do that because he's got to go and drag Nicolas Javert back because he's run off. Wasn't entirely clear whether he was going to have a go at the fourth official or at the Wolves bench. But he has to go and pull him back. Then Gabriel Jesus, after the final whistle, gets involved in that spat with Mosquera. They're not the signs of a team thinking clearly, thinking rationally. That's a team that is really fraying. And it's not the first time we've seen it. So look, it's not terminal. They're still 5 points clear. They still have a fairly good chance between the quadruple, but it feels that the tone has changed again over the past 2 games.
They are such a strange case study, though, Jonathan. Like, full of contradictions. You take that defeat at the Emirates to United, like, they have Ellen Road the following Saturday, which is almost calling out like a giant banana skin. And they were really excellent. They put Leeds to the sword. They followed it up with the win against Sunderland. A slightly misleading scoreline, perhaps. They weren't exceptional. But, I mean, it's a dominant, good, professional win. So they go and steady the ship after the United defeat. And then the anxiety seems to really re-emerge. Brentford away, you can bake that into the course of a season. That can happen. Brentford are a very good side. I don't know, does what City did at Anfield kind of permeate the group and get into their heads and they get a kind of bad feeling about all this? I don't know what happens to precipitate the anxiety we saw against Wolves. But I kind of just left with the thought they really shouldn't be this anxious. They've looked like the likely title winners all season. They've looked like the best squad by a distance all season. And so it's just very strange, I think, that they have this anxiety.
Maybe the United game, maybe you see there the anxiety of the Emirates. I mean, the problem Sunderland have is that, particularly away from home, they offer almost no attacking threat. It's play it long to Bobby, hope something happens. And Arsenal dealt with that pretty comfortably. So they were never really under pressure in that game. There's a little bit, just before, I mean, they scored, what was it, 42, 43 minutes, they took the lead in that game. And you could just feel a little bit of tension of, oh, are we actually going to get a goal here? So that wasn't too bad. But the game against United, where they played pretty well, took the lead, and then for whatever reason, something just goes in that next 5 minutes. And it's a really sloppy pass, gives away the equaliser. And immediately you feel the anxiety. And it's players, it's coaching staff, it's fans, it's a whole environment. And that's obviously built up over 21 years of not winning the league and also over the last 3 seasons of finishing second. Yeah, I think it's totally understandable that it's more obvious in the Premier League because partly because I think the Premier League is a tougher competition this season than the Champions League. Certainly at this phase. I mean, by the time you get to the quarterfinals, that will change. But I really think the 5th best team in the Premier League or 6th best team in the Premier League is significantly better than all but sort of half a dozen teams in Europe. But also, there's just not the pressure in the Champions League. If a group stage is not a pressured environment, you lose a game, so what? You finish top, you finish 4th, who cares? Liverpool found last season, it doesn't matter. Even if you slip into the playoff round, it doesn't matter. But yeah, they don't have this. I know Arsenal have never won the Champions League, and I know that's a big omission from my record, but it's not the same level of expectation. It's a knockout competition. If you slip up, that happens. You worry about that when you've got 2 or 3 league titles in the bag. It's the league title that hurts them. It's the league title that they keep slipping up in. But it does seem to be almost entirely a psychological issue, added to, I think, fatigue. And I think that's been a really notable thing all season, not just for them, for every club. If Arsenal carry on at the points per game record at the minute, they'll get to 82 points. Now, if that wins the title, it's 1 more than Leicester in 2016. It's 2 more than United in 2011. And United in 2000, I think, was 78, were they? So it'd be 4 more than them. But actually, maybe there's one a couple of years after that was very low. But basically, since the turn of the century, it would be the 4th lowest points total to win the title. And in a way, that's less significant than the fact that no other team is going to get more than that. So, it's unlikely to get more than that. So if Arsenal can't do it this season, when their rivals are also deeply fallible, when are they going to do it? And you do sort of think if they don't do it this year, that the scars of that will endure for a long time.
Yeah.
And maybe that is increasing the pressure that they know that they're unlikely to face a City as inconsistent as this, a Liverpool as damaged as this. I mean, yeah, Villa might still be involved in it. If we're talking about 81, 82 points to win the title, Manchester United can get up to 81, I think. I mean, it's not likely, but yeah, you do think if United win every game from now to the end of the season, they have a pretty good chance of being champions because that would then put pressure on everybody else.
Yeah. That image of Arteta saying "calm down" is kind of a striking one. Generally, that doesn't work in life. Calm down. I mean, I've rarely seen it do the necessary. What are your readings on him? Where is he as a manager? Like his public utterances, his body language. Obviously, we're not behind the scenes. We can't comment on what's happening on the training ground, the messages he's giving them. But just based on what we see in public, where do you think Arteta is in the midst of this pressure?
Well, the odd thing is, I think in the past, he has been a vector of that anxiety. That a lot of the tension, a lot of the conspiracy theories, the negativity, I think, has come from him. But actually, I think he seems to have really reined that in this season, even last season, to be honest. I mean, last season, they were never particularly close to winning the title. So, although they were second, it wasn't like the two previous seasons. But in terms of criticism of referees and in terms of moaning about injuries, he's been doing far less of that. He's far more there's far more equanimity about him, and that I think is a positive. But you see him having to calm down his staff. Well, that's not a good thing either. That shouldn't be his job. He shouldn't have to do that. He should be able to focus on the game in front of him. You also wonder, the way he plays, the desire for control, the um, the analysis of everything through data is something key and psychological lost in doing that. That I mean, I remember there was a game at Fulham. Was it last season? Or maybe even the season before when they drew 1-1, having been comfortably the better side. 25 shots to 5, something like that. Fulham score their first chance. One of those games, and he could have just said that, and everybody, yeah, it's fair enough. But he doesn't. He comes out with this long thing about XG and how if you keep getting the XG right and you restrict the opposition to under 0.2 XG or whatever, you will keep clean sheets. If you keep clean sheets, you will win games. And you sort of think, well, if the players are hearing that all the time, it's not really sort of encouraging them to have faith in their own ability to trust themselves. And I've sort of thought this about Guardiola in his frequent Champions League failures. So I think the Lyon game is a classic example of you Manchester City. You've been brilliant all season. Just go and play. You'll beat Lyon. But the fear of what they might do to you, the desire to stop them, becomes inhibitive. Now, clearly for Guardiola, we're talking a handful of games over his career. His career is extraordinarily successful. But maybe Arteta, of course, worked with Guardiola for a long time. Maybe he has inherited some of that, and that induces anxiety in his players.
So, largely anxiety is a significant factor here. In terms of the style of football they play, how culpable is that in your view? People will point to how risk averse it is. People will hark back to when Eze scored that hat trick in the North London derby as almost. I think that was a great moment for Arsenal fans of hope, as in, oh, this thing is about to blossom. Maybe a sprinkling of ingenuity and just individual flair will be allowed to flourish within this excellent system in many ways. And yet Eze has kind of almost been dulled, is the narrative. Are Arsenal and Arteta, or courtesy of Arteta, are they as much on a kind of leash as people talk about in your view? Are they as muzzled? Are they as kind of almost deadened? Because, like I said, there are times where the football can break out. There are times where Hincape, like last night, ends up in a kind of very advanced position, and the fullbacks go into midfield, and there is interplay, but there's no doubt there is a kind of stodginess at times as well. So anxiety one for sure. The style of football, how culpable is that in all this, in your view, Jonathan?
Yeah, I think there's two sort of connected elements to that. So I think there are games, and you go back to the game in Anfield. Was that the third game of the season, where it was a vulnerable Liverpool, and they didn't go for them.
Yeah.
They let Liverpool play themselves into the game, and you sort of think, okay, that's a manager not sniffing the situation. It's understandable. It's Anfield. It's forgivable. But I just think a manager absolutely at the top of the psychological side of the game would have said, this lot are fragile. Let's go from the first 20 minutes. Let's break them. And he didn't, and they lose the game 1-0. And as a one-off, yeah, so what? You shrug, you move on. But that was also true the season before last, the game at City, when with 20 minutes to go, they were on top. It was 0-0, and they settled for 0-0 to maintain their lead. Whereas, yeah, easy to say from the press box, but it seemed that they had an opportunity there to really drive home advantage, win that game, give themselves clear water. And what they did was they left themselves vulnerable to losing to Aston Villa, which they did, and City winning every game from then until the end of the season, which they did. So I think there's a couple of times when they've failed to seize the opportunity when it presented themselves. Um, but I think there's also something in the focus on set plays means it's very hard to get the fluency that great sides often have. And I think that was really well expressed by Thomas Granemark, who was the throwing coach at Liverpool, is now the throwing coach at Arsenal. And he was asked, you're meant to be this great. This is when he gets to Arsenal. He's asked, you're meant to be this great throwing coach. But when you had, I don't know, what was it, 5 years, whatever, at Liverpool, but didn't score from a single long throws. What were you actually doing?
Mm.
And his answer was, well, we never take long throws because the whole thing was about building momentum. Taking a long throw kills momentum. And you sort of think, well, there's your answer. That's the problem. That if you take 90 seconds over every set play, whether be it a long throw, be it a corner, be it a free kick, sure, there may be gains on the one hand, but something is lost. It's a payoff. And of course, this is the great. This is why football is the greatest thing that humanity's ever created. That there are no right answers. There's payoffs and everything. There's nothing. If you want to focus on set plays, that's fine, but you have to pay a cost for that. If you want to focus on playing really fluid football, that's also fine, but the cost is you won't be so effective from set plays.
Obviously, the other aspect to all this is Manchester City will have to go on an excellent run, and despite the heroics at Anfield, it still feels too far stretched to suggest that's going to prompt some great run. They have too many problems.
Yes, I mean, I'd be very surprised if they win, 12 games they've got left this season. I'd be amazed if they take 36 points in those 12 games.
Yeah.
But they are now in a situation, if they do that, they do win the title. It's been a while since that's been true. But yeah, I mean, they don't. City 3 or 4 years ago, you just thought that was entirely possible, but not this side. They're too fragile at the back. But maybe Rodri coming back to fitness, maybe that does give them a bit more strength, a bit more solidity. But even the fact we have to talk about the heroics at Anfield, the fact that was a hectic game, but sort of they suddenly yanked their way in the final 15 minutes. That was not a classic City control and win. So City, what's a realistic target for them? 28 points, something like that, from the final 12 games, maybe 30 points. And I think if they got 30 points, they'd be pretty close. They'd be pretty competitive.
Yeah, not least if they beat Arsenal along the way. That
well, of course, yeah.
Big, yeah. Well, look, we have a title race against all expectations. I mean, it just felt like it was never really going to happen, and suddenly it is. It's unfolding before our eyes. Can I get your opinion briefly on the Gianluca Prestiani, Vini Jr. situation, Jonathan? It's dominated, obviously, world football talk for the last few days in many respects. And increasingly, the focus has ended up almost not on the 20-year-old who has, it seems, made a huge mistake, which is going to follow him for the rest of his career, but on Jose Mourinho, whose post-match comments have really infuriated lots of people. Like the gist, we played it earlier in the show. He acknowledges an amazing goal and then is sort of saying, look, unfortunately, he wasn't happy just to score an amazing goal. Jose Mourinho, of all people, you have to celebrate in a respectful way. And Gabriel Clark sort of said, so, sorry, are you saying he incited this? Yes, I believe so. Yes, I believe so. On what Prestiani said precisely, he said, I've had different reports from Prestiani himself and from Vinicius Jr. He seemed to, reach for a bizarre logic that because Eusebio is the greatest player in the history of the club, that racism just almost borderline doesn't exist around Benfica. And then it kind of wrapped up in fairly awkward fashion with him saying, wherever Vinny Jr. plays, something happens always. They were extraordinary comments. I mean, the kindest interpretation anyone gave them was that he was very emotional and maybe just shouldn't have spoken at that point. But there were several points in the interview where he said fairly egregious things. It wasn't just, oh, he didn't phrase that part very well. I think he knew exactly what he was saying. I interpreted it as Vinny Jr. brings this on himself. And when you're talking about racism, man, that jarred. I mean, what are you doing here, Jose? Was kind of the feeling from a lot of people who still have a soft spot for him.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should never forget how deeply unpleasant he is at times. And to try and offer for Jose Mourinho, of all people, the defence he's emotional after a game, nobody has used post-match press conferences as calculatedly as he has. So to suddenly think that he didn't know exactly what he was doing on this occasion, I think is a very generous interpretation. So look, the incident itself, UEFA have to investigate it. I don't want to prejudge it. Obviously, you wonder what on earth a player is doing if he covers his mouth when talking to an opponent. I understand it when you're doing it to a teammate because you want to hide whatever tactical ideas you've got. But to an opponent, I'm not really sure why you would do that unless you knew that if it could be lip read, you get yourself into trouble. So that that has to be judged, and I don't want to prejudge it. But that's the answer Mourinho should have given, and he should have said, "And look, if it is found, I will talk to my player. I'll try and find out what happened. If it is found that he has racially abused an opponent, we will take the strongest possible action." And then what that may be, I guess there are employment frameworks in every country that differ, and you work within that. But that's not really the point. The point is you take the strongest possible action. To try and sort of wriggle out of it, I think is appalling, and it shows, I think, a really worrying sign of how maybe a lot of the anti-racism messaging has been lip service from certain people. Yeah, I personally, I don't find Vinicius a particularly engaging figure, but that's not the point. It doesn't whatever he's done, it doesn't justify that. And to be honest, the celebration, I didn't really notice anything particularly. But I mean, even if it had been outrageous, so what? It doesn't justify it.
I know, but it really wasn't. It was like bang, kind of standard dancing around the corner flag celebration.
So, yeah, no. Could Vinicius's behaviour on the pitch be better? Yes, absolutely, it could. Is that relevant in this context? No, not at all.
Strange, time for Mourinho as well, because the heroics of how Benfica reached the knockout stages, kind of a viral moment, and God, look at him, there's life in the old dog. And then there's talk like, would Madrid take a look at him? This has been talked about in a vaguely serious way, and then he goes and does this. So I don't know to what extent he's punctured all that, but I suspect to quite a large extent.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes it very difficult for him to work in any country that is even semi-serious about dealing with racism. So I now think it's almost inconceivable you come back to the Premier League, say. I mean, the outcry about that would be huge and should be huge. I mean, I think it's pretty clear certain countries don't take anti-racism as seriously as others, and maybe there are still avenues for him there. But I mean, even something like, I don't know if it's ever possible, but now that Brazil have decided that they can tolerate the idea of a non-Brazilian manager, might he have had an opportunity to go there? Well, clearly he doesn't now. So, yeah, I mean, extraordinary that he should even have a mindset to say those things, but extraordinary also the damage he's probably done to himself. And as right, there should be damage.
Briefly, you mentioned watching the Bodo Glimt win against Inter Milan. They were 3-1 winners as they look to make it into the last 16. Is your Bodo Glimt knowledge passable enough for a question, or how are you on them?
Well, I went to Bodo to see them play Tottenham back in the autumn, so I can describe the houses in the city if you want. I can tell you.
So we're
I can tell you how far the walk is from the airport down to the fjord.
We are talking Arctic Circle, aren't we? Northern Norway, right up there.
Yeah, yeah, and they I think they only entered the top division of the Norwegian league in the mid-70s because North Norwegian teams were banned because they were seen as being too far away. And I think actually, I don't want to go too hard on this because I don't know, but the impression I got was there was a sense from metropolitan Norway that North Norwegians were somehow not worthy of being involved.
Right.
So whether there's a racial element to that, I couldn't quite put my finger on. But I think certainly North Norwegians feel that there's a metropolitan Norwegian prejudice against them.
Okay, interesting. And so they only made their Champions League debut in about 2021. The stadium holds 8,000 people. It's a tiny town. Is there a kind of accepted brief summary of how they've managed to do all this?
They've been really smart. I mean, there has been some money, but not huge amounts. I think Kettle Knutson, who is the coach, he was the assistant to the previous coach, so he's sort of carried on that good work. Yeah, they haven't spent huge amounts of money. It's a very Scandinavian squad. I think there's a couple of Danes in there, but mostly Norwegian squad.
Mm.
They play very direct, attacking football. They're very good to watch. It was one of those. I mean, I did the Tottenham game. It was one of those really enjoyable nights where, yeah, I would never have gone to Bodo had it not been for that game. But it's a really interesting little place, really pretty little place, and the football culture is clearly thriving, and they seem to be doing everything right. Um, I think they're the only top flight team in Europe with a oblique stroke in their name. Um, and the reason for that, if you want to know, is that Bodo's the name of the town, Glimt is the name of the club. There was another team, I think it's called something like Tromshaven, Tordshaven, something like that. There's a team called Glimt from there. So to differentiate them, they called them Bodo Glimt. There was a dash, but then I think it was in the 60s on betting coupons. That was seen as being confusing because it looked like Bodo were playing against Glimt. So they put in the oblique stroke.
Well, listen, obviously I knew that as well, but I think it's good you shared that with the listeners. Um, Thanks so much. That's great, Jonathan. Take it easy.
Yes, thank you.